they can read my book. If they're afraid of the truth, they don't have to read any book. So I don't want to go out of my way to cause people distress. On the other hand, I suspect that once one has, you say had the rug pulled out, but I mean, once you have kicked the rug from under you and given up these illusions, if you do it perhaps in the prime of life, when you've got a lot ahead of you, you will find that your life is much more fulfilled, much fuller. You will find that you face the world squarely, courageously, and life will become all the sweeter because it's finite, because you know exactly why you're there, what the universe is all about, not exactly, but as far as science of your age allows you to do. That's a very courageous position. It's a very noble position. It's a very wonderful position to be in, a position of living the truth rather than living a comforting lie.
But you hear from religious people, especially the kind who have their own shows on TV, that if you don't believe in God, it's necessarily true that your life is hopeless. You have no reason to get out of bed in the morning. If there is no God, there's no right or wrong, no purpose. You might as well just blow your brains out.
Well, there are two things there. One is it worth getting out of bed in the morning? The other thing is there any right and wrong? The getting out of bed in the morning, I hope I've just dealt with. All the atheists that I know, well, certainly there's no more tendency for them to have futile and meaningless lives than the theists that I know, and I think there's no objective evidence that atheists lead less fulfilled lives. I suspect that the contrary is the case. Certainly, I get fulfillment from all sorts of things like science, like music, like human love, family love, poetry, literature, love of nature, sunsets, sunrises. All these things we can enjoy. We perhaps enjoy them all the more. We savor them all the more because we know they're finite. There are very, very good reasons for getting up in the morning, and I actually used that phrase in my book, Unweaving the Rainbow, and tried to expound it. The other question, whether there is no right or wrong, that's actually rather a grotesque suggestion when you actually look at the right and wrong that Scripture recommends. It is truly horrible. The sorts of things that are recommended, the kinds of role models that we're asked to follow, not least the God of the Old Testament himself, who, as I said in the book, is probably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. There is no justification in the view that, as a matter of fact, we do get our morals from Scripture. If we did, we'd still be stoning adulteresses to death and stoning people for breaking the Sabbath and for erecting graven images and things like that. As a matter of fact, we don't do it. Our morality, the things that we do, the ethics, our social mores, have all greatly moved on since biblical times. When you talk to a theologian and say how really horrible the morals of the Old Testament are, the theologian is likely to reply, yes, of course they're horrible, but we don't believe that anymore. We've moved on since then. And that's, of course, my whole point. We have moved on since then. You can find nice verses in the Bible. You can pick and choose the nice verses and reject the nasty verses. But there has to be some criterion for picking and choosing. And what that criterion is, I don't know where it comes from, but wherever it comes from, it's available to the non-religious as well as the religious. The one place it most certainly does not come from is Scripture or religion itself. It comes from a kind of liberal consensus, from debates in Congress, from legal decisions, from journalism, from dinner party conversations. All these things add up to a steadily shifting zeitgeist, and that's nothing to do with religion.
And it's not just from the body politic, but ethicists, secular ethicists. Can they inform this discussion?
Of course, I should have said that. The academic discipline of secular moral philosophy, in the tradition of Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill up to Peter Singer today, is the way that academics discuss morals on the basis of non-religious or secular principles of morality.
Richard, you argue not only against the classical proofs of God's existence, the ontological argument, the argument from beauty, the argument from personal experience about which we were speaking a little earlier. You treat all the traditional arguments that philosophers and theologians have used to try to prove God's existence, but you also argue that there's almost certainly no God. How can you be so certain that there's no God?
Well, I did say almost certainly. The argument is, it's in chapter 4 of the book, which I think has that title, and it's a kind of reversal of the favorite argument of the creationists. The favorite argument of the creationists, or as they call themselves nowadays, intelligent design theorists, is that things in the living world and perhaps in other parts of the world are too improbable to have just happened. So something like a bacterial flagellum or an eye or a heart is much too complicated, which is another way of saying much too statistically improbable to have just happened. If you take the bits of an eye or the bits of a heart and shake them around at random, you will not get something that sees or something that pumps. So that's the argument from improbability. And what the creationist says from that is, because it's too improbable to have just happened, therefore it must have been designed. What they overlook is that the designer himself would have to be even more improbable than that which he is alleged to have designed, that which he is alleged to have created. So that the argument from improbability shoots the argument for God in the foot. Now, the only known solution to the problem of how we explain improbability is some kind of incremental, step-by-step explanation which works up from primeval simplicity up to later complexity, which means improbability. That's what Darwinian natural selection does. It's an example of what the philosopher Daniel Dennett calls a crane as opposed to a skyhook. A crane is an explanation that really does explanatory work, as Darwin's theory of natural selection does. It starts